Hey everybody, what's up? Monday, August 11th. Next week I'm heading out to Montana. Excited about that. Um, yeah, so every day I try to give you some kind of color or explanation as to like the way trade occurred that particular day. Today, I got to be honest, I was kind of surprised by the weak action in the market. I mean, we're going to have a strong flow week, but that doesn't really hit till Wednesday and Friday. Last Friday, right before the weekend was basically no additional flow. It was like 540 million, which is negligible. And I checked customs taxes, that's the tariffs. They were 400 million deposited on Friday. So that's running at the level that it's been running at for the last month. So I didn't see any particular increase in that. So everything's kind of like steady. So I don't know, maybe it was some headline thing. I didn't see it, but I was a little bit surprised, but I don't think it's anything. It's like I say, you can't always assign like a meaning to every single day. I mean, you just can't. I mean, so it could be technical. It could be some fund adjusting its position. Somebody said so. I just don't know. The other thing that was interesting was the big drop in gold. And I sent out an email saying, gold did a copper. Meaning like we saw 2 weeks ago when Trump said he was going to put tariffs on copper and it shot way up. And then like the next day or a couple of days later, he said, no, we're not going to do that. Or certain kinds of copper is going to be excluded from that. And then it dropped way back down. And that was the same thing with gold on Friday. Gold ran up. It spiked up on Trump saying he was going to put tariffs on imported gold. And today he said, no, we're not going to do that. And it came crashing right back down, which I think at 3,400, it's a buy. And I'm sure there's people in the White House who are trading this stuff. But like I always tell you guys, like we're not in that position. So we got to take a different tack. We got to take a different approach. And our approach, or my approach, as you know, is, the macroeconomic based on my analytical framework, which is the flows. Apart from that, let me just say that sometimes it really shocks me how people, they still don't get the MMT stuff. And they come on here sometimes with some really crazy comments. I had a guy today who posted up, he said, there can be no printed money without MMT. And that is like such a confused statement. That's like saying there could be no gravity without physics. Or, there could be no heart or lungs without biology. I mean, it's just like a ridiculous statement. Physics describes matter and the universe. It'd be like saying there could be no atoms and molecules and electrons without physics. Physics is a description of matter and the forces of the universe. Macro and subatomic. MMT is a description of monetary systems. That's all it is. It's not printing money. It describes monetary systems, whether that's like the system that we have in the United States, which is, they call it fiat money, or it could be fixed exchange rates. It could be gold standards. It doesn't matter. MMT is just a body of principles that helps you understand monetary systems. It's not a policy. It doesn't create anything in and of itself. I mean, it's kind of funny because it's been out there for a while. And I just, when I see stuff like that, and it's, it pops up infrequently now on this channel. I think a lot of you who are regular followers of this channel, you get it. But it does pop up, and to me it says, maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. Maybe it says that more people are becoming aware of MMT, even though they have the wrong understanding of it. And that has to be, there has to be a learning process involved in that, if they want to learn. I mean, some don't. Some are very, very comfortable in the wrong understanding and trying to keep that, trying to perpetuate that. The other thing is that last week, Friday, one of my subscribers sent me a post by Mark Cuban on X, on Twitter, right? X, where Cuban was arguing with now everybody knows Mark Cuban, billionaire, Shark Tank, frequent critic of Trump, whatever. So Cuban was arguing with some guy saying that you don't understand economics. The government has to pay its bills. And if we don't lend the government our money, the whole system is going to collapse. Now, a lot of you who understand where I'm about to go with this, you probably already rolling your eyes and you know the answer I'm going to give. This is classic. I mean, this is a guy who's very, very well known, probably very educated. I don't know what school he went to. It wasn't an Ivy League school, or not that that matters or anything like that. Very successful, at least from a financial standpoint. And then, by the way, that's a whole other argument we could get into, because I think the guy was extremely lucky selling out his firm, which was, I don't know, I think it was called broadcast.com or something like that, right at the top of the dot-com bubble in 2000 or 1999, something like that. Sold it out to Yahoo for $5 billion, which I think Yahoo eventually went to choke on that. It ended up to be nothing, okay? So the guy, beautiful timing. Maybe it was luck, maybe it wasn't, I don't know. Anyway, that's a whole other story. So the question I have, and I think like smart people, intelligent people, they would probably ask themselves at some point this question, because I know I did. Now, I've told you guys, back in the 90s, I was of this belief system. We're going to run out of money, and China lends to us, and the dollar's going to collapse, and we're printing money and all this stuff. And I was actually, I told you guys, I was one of the first regular guest hosts of CNBC's Squawk Box when they launched that show, like I think in 1995. I used to appear on there regularly once a month. And I used to say this stuff. I wish I had my old videotapes of me saying this stuff. It would be cool to watch it, but I don't anymore. You got to ask yourself, like, if we lend the government dollars, where do we get the dollars from? Right? I mean, it would be like saying, I like always going back to the Monopoly explanation, because I think everybody could relate. Most people played the game. Imagine you bought the Monopoly game and you brought it home and you opened up the game and you took out the instructions of how to play. And in the very first line, it says, okay, now everybody give the game green and yellow and blue and pink money. Otherwise, we can't play the game. You'd be like, what's this? Where do I get green and yellow and blue and pink money? And meanwhile, the green and yellow and blue and pink money is sitting in the box. You literally have stacks of that stuff sitting in the box waiting to be distributed. And the instructions are saying, okay, all you players now, if you don't go and give the game green and blue and yellow and pink money, I think those are what the colors are, then the game's gonna blow up. We can't play the game. How do we lend our money to the government, which is dollars, okay? Because the whole system, our system is based on dollars. Where do we get that from? Where do we get that from? There's only one place in the whole entire world where dollars could come from, and that is from the issuer, the monopoly sovereign issuer of the US dollar, which is the US government. This idea that somehow we got to give go through the sequence of how this has to play out. It's the only way that this can play out. Okay, even the Fed, with its ability to credit the banking system with electronic dollars, it doesn't operate with the Treasury in that fashion. It doesn't do that with the Treasury. Okay? It's not allowed even to do that. Now, some countries, they can do that. I think Japan the Bank of Japan can directly buy securities, if I'm not mistaken, from the Japanese finance ministry, I think. But here in the United States, we don't do it that way. Now, in Cubans' defense, and in a lot of people's defense, they're still operating on this notion kind of a gold standard, even though they know we're not on a gold standard, but in their minds, it still operates that way. Like the money has to come from somewhere. They don't accept the idea that it's created endogenously, all right? That they think it has to come from somewhere. I don't know, we dig it up out of the ground, or the Chinese have it in some factories over there or something like that, or we somehow have it. We get it, but that's after we transact with the government. That's the other thing, is like when he says the government has to pay its bills and we have to give it money, the government can always pay its bills because its bills are denominated in dollars. What the government needs from us are the goods and services to provision itself, right? Like it says in the preamble of the Constitution, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and ensure the blessings of liberty and prosperity for ourselves, and, blah, blah, blah. Provide for the common defense. It's in the Constitution. This is what the government must do for us. Provide for the common defense. So that means it has to create a military. It has to provision that military with whatever, soldiers, with their salaries, military munitions, ships, planes, armaments. Promote the general welfare. That means make sure that the welfare of the citizenry is good, is okay. It needs to provide goods and services, which it doesn't create. That's us. The economy creates the goods and services that we sell to the government. The government pays in its money. And that money gets distributed through the economy. It becomes ubiquitous. The government levies taxes, which are only payable in its own currency. So the currency gets distributed around. Even if you don't have a tax liability, somebody else probably does. So that's what imparts the value. But paying its bills are denominated in the system that we have set up, which is dollars. Now, if we were still on a gold standard or a fixed exchange rate, this is another thing where a lot of these people, they get it wrong because they conflate our system in the United States, which is a dollar-based system, uniquely. Like, we don't operate in foreign currency. But there are countries that operate where they've taken on debt in foreign currency. Countries like Argentina and these kind of countries that have a history of getting into deep debt in somebody else's currency. So when these people talk about, they're all hung up on this printing money stuff, like they just can't get it out of their heads. When money is just an accounting unit. That's all it is. And this notion that somehow we have to limit the availability of accounting units. Imagine an accounting system. I'm not an accountant, but maybe some of you are. Imagine an accounting system where you only had a finite number of units, 0 to 10, and that's it. You weren't allowed to go any further. You couldn't do 11, you couldn't do 12. The system, you couldn't do accounting in that system, or it would be so limited. Like everybody would be rigidly placed, or every business, every enterprise has to be rigidly within some kind of a box in terms of its ability to function, because you couldn't record things. You couldn't keep track of things because you only have a limited number of units. See, we tried that in the past. In the course of human societies, there have been all kinds of monetary systems. I mean, we started off probably, primitively with like a barter system. Somebody had some wheat, somebody had some rice, they exchanged it. Then we went to, a metallic system, gold or silver. And what happened? As soon as you used up or your supply of gold and silver were claimed for, the amount of liabilities that you had to go get more. This created war. Like you had to go out and conquer another territory or people or country to get their gold and silver. I mean, the whole history of the British Empire is fascinating, because I read this book about the British Navy, how it was nothing in the beginning. Spain had this gigantic empire, this armada. Everybody heard of the Spanish Armada. Spain had this gigantic empire, and and the entire empire was based on silver. That was their monetary system. And they used to get the silver from the mines in Mexico and Peru. They used to send their ships over there. And the British had this ragtag, it wasn't even a fleet of boats. It was really started off like kind of nothing, rickety old boats. I wouldn't even call them fishing boats. But they used to go and they used to attack the Spanish convoys coming back laden with silver from the mines in Mexico and Peru. And they would steal their monetary base. And it ended up, it was a brilliant, brilliant strategy. And basically at that time, these Brits, they were basically pirates. What's that guy's name? Nelson, Admiral Nelson. He was a freaking pirate. And he became knighted and everything else like that. They used to steal the silver, and it destroyed the monetary system. There's other examples of this, like in the United States in the 19th century, a lot of banks issued their own currency, and a lot of that currency was backed also by metal, gold and silver. And if something happened, and that was all leveraged up, like let's say they had X amount of silver to back their issuance, but they would issue like 10 times or 100 times more, so it diluted the currency, but they had only a certain amount of silver or gold, whatever it was backed by. And if there was a run, they would never have enough. And there were a couple of banking panics that were actually set off by sinking of ships that carried the gold and silver. A few times that happened, and it set off a national banking panic because the system ran out of money. So it's much better to have a system that floats with the expansion of the economy, of the demand for goods and services, of the growth in population, of the desire of people to lift their level up, as opposed to having a system which is finite, that limits potential and literally funnels things up to to those who can grab it, who can take it. That's the other thing is all the time with this money printing is inflation. It's just absolutely not true. There is no example in the history of the world of systems like ours, where the United States, all of its liabilities, the U.S. government denominated in its own currency of issue, okay? There is no example. Like, we don't borrow in any foreign currency. We don't have a fixed exchange rate. We don't have a gold standard. There is no example in history where a system like this blew up or ended up into some hyperinflation. The only time you see these examples and these events are in systems where there's something else going on where there's some borrowing in a foreign currency, a debt denominated in a foreign currency, some kind of fixed exchange rate that blows up, like they had the ERM in Europe during the 80s, that the famous trade by George Soros when he shorted the British pound, because that the exchange rate mechanism, which was a fixed exchange rate mechanism, it couldn't hold. And he shorted it. And he made a lot of money, $1 billion or something like that. That was his big score. So like, it's just an accounting unit, man. You got to get over it. In 1933, the GDP, I looked this up. In 1933, the GDP of the United States was like 58 billion. Now it's 29 trillion. What is the GDP? It's a record of the output of goods and services produced. That's a 51,000% increase. And we went off the gold standard. In other words, we didn't have a gold standard. FDR took us off the gold standard in 1933. And according to all these people who say that's a terrible, terrible thing, the economy has grown by 51,000%. The measurement of goods and services produced has grown by 51,000%. If you want to go to 1971, when Nixon took us off the international gold standard, when the GDP was 1.2 trillion, now it's 29 trillion. That's a 2,300% increase in GDP. I mean, by any measure, we have more abundance now than we've ever had. I'm not saying it's equally distributed, okay? I'm not, that's a political issue. That's a whole other thing. But in terms of just in the aggregate, when you're talking about economics, when you're talking about abundance, when you're talking about output, you cannot make the argument that the system we're on, which is just a pure accounting system, has caused some kind of a decline in living standards. You just simply cannot. Anyway, that's my talk. Well, I ran pretty long today. I hope some of you lasted to the end. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. And don't forget to go to my website, pitbulleconomics.com, and sign up for a 30-day free trial to MMT Trader. Thank you. Bye.